So morning again, GRC colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here to present on integrated eGRC. My name is Akhenaton Marcano. I'm the head of operational risk and controls for First Citizens Bank in Trinidad and Tobago. It's good to be back here after 2 years. 2 years ago, I presented in June 2017, having just deployed 6 modules from the MetricStream app library. And today, I'm just going to give you a sort of update on where we are and the key learnings that have come out of that process. So, without any further ado, this is what we'll cover today, just an overview of my organization, First Citizens Bank. We'll talk about our GRC program, the governance and the challenges associated with it. The 3 R's, readiness, roadmap, and rollout. The business value and realized benefits from implementing GRC. And as I said before, the key learnings and best practices. Hopefully, I can conduct that all in time so you can have a few questions at the end. Okay, so who is First Citizens Bank, right? Well, we are a leading indigenous financial services group headquartered in Trinidad and Tobago. So for those who may not know, Trinidad and Tobago is the home of Brian Lara, a world-famous cricketer, Dwight York, a world-famous footballer, and Nicki Minaj, a world-famous rapper. Right? First Citizens is a publicly traded company listed on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, and it's majority owned by the state. We have operations in the Caribbean and Central America, and we offer a wide range of banking and financial services products, as you can see. We've been rated investment grade for several years now. Our current rating is BBB stable from Standard & Poor's, and we have won a couple of awards very consistently in the past couple of years, Bank of the Year from the Banker magazine, and Safest Bank in Trinidad and Tobago 2017 Global Finance. We're quite proud of being the safest bank in Trinidad and Tobago. So just a quick visual of where we are. So you see Trinidad and Tobago on the map, right? And 3 other Caribbean islands, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Barbados, as well as a presence in Central America through Costa Rica. So our vision and mission has been recently recast to be our stakeholders' preferred financial partner through excellence, care, and integrity. Our mission, build rewarding and sustainable relationships through a highly engaged team, versatile and secure technology, and innovative financial services. So these are our core values, and really over the past 3 years, this has been our tagline really. We say we are EPIC, right? A nice little acronym there. Excellence, people, integrity, customers. And it's interesting, as I look at the footer on the slide, perform with integrity, which we know is MetricStream tagline, it aligns so well with the core values of First Citizens in terms of that focus on integrity and excellence. Okay, so what's been driving that focus on GRC for First Citizens? Well, the English-speaking Caribbean, in terms of the banking industry, is facing a number of headwinds. Most of the banks, ourselves included, are focusing on executing an effective digital banking strategy that balances risk and reward. But at the same time, we want to make sure it actually makes sense to the bottom line, and that our customers will actually take up that digital banking offering that we're going to be presenting to them. Simultaneously, we are addressing greater regulatory scrutiny coming along with the implementation of Basel II and Basel III, new requirements for information security and data privacy, financial crime, including AML and counter-financing of terrorism, and even added to that FATCA, which I know some of you may be aware of. And there's been an increasing focus to care more about the customer, and not just from a financial perspective, almost expecting a social role, as it were, for the bank. And this is something that the regulator and the political authorities are actually imposing on the banking sector as a whole, but in particularly us as an indigenous bank. And we have to do all of this while remaining profitable. The third key challenge, these are small economies that begin right now. And when you're the second largest bank in a small economy, you quickly run out of room. So what's happening now, we are having to expand our company footprint beyond domestic borders. And that is something that we have to be prepared to take that chance and take that risk. So given this state of affairs, we have actually been trying to set up a governance program, a GRC program rather, that allows us to handle these situations while being cost effective. So the model that we came up with has 3 layers. So the top layer is the board Enterprise Risk Management Committee. It's a board level committee. And so they were given approval to implement our GRC automation initiative. And they have provided high-level oversight of the progress of our initiative. So they receive quarterly reports, and their big concern is ensuring that our implementation aligns with the risk and control pillar of our strategy. So our strategy has different pillars, and risk and control is a key one. And so this initiative was something that they saw as being of very high value. So they have provided high-level guidance on the implementation approach throughout. The next level is our project steering committee, chaired by the CRO, who I report to, with membership of other C-suite positions, the CIO, the CFO, the CCO, the head of legal and compliance, as well as the head of audit. So this committee really focused on making sure that the cross-functional issues got addressed. So issues about harmonizing the approach to issue management, harmonizing the way that issues are reported and rated. So those are the kinds of things that came out at that committee level. Of course, they also performed the normal monitoring role in terms of whether the project was achieving scope, budget, and timelines. But the key thing for this committee is also ensuring that after the project is delivered, that the benefits are actually realized. Because many times, there's a view that once a project comes in on scope, on budget, and on time, you have achieved. But really, a GRC program, success is really measured, in my view anyway, by the level of user acceptance and user adoption, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. That's when you know that you're actually getting benefits. So at the lowest level, there was a cross-functional project team led by myself and coordinated by the project management office. So this was the arms and legs, basically, of the project, executing the tactical and operational activities, the training, the use case development, the testing, and troubleshooting day-to-day issues. So this team liaised directly with MetricStream as our vendor, and they would have recommended change requests and GRC positions to the steering committee. So what were the key challenges as we look to approach the GRC implementation? So on the people side, there was a big learning gap, really, for us to understand that after the implementation of eGRC, some of the ways that we did our work would change. They would have to change. And that the way that work would unfold would actually be better for the organization. This would mean that some people's roles would have to change as well, and that they would have to understand that their work would have to shift to a more analytical focus as opposed to data collation, data gathering, that kind of stuff. The second challenge, which I think is actually more important, was persuading the business, the front shop, as it were, the front office, to explicitly accept their role as first line of defense. Now, of course, is a mantra we have been preaching for quite some time at First Citizens Bank, and really you get a sense that the business tacitly accepted it. But when you now have a system that's setting you up if you are the owner to respond to an issue or to perform a self-assessment, it's no longer abstract, right? It's tangible. So they basically would have required some convincing to take up the challenge of accepting their role as the risk originator and therefore the first risk responder. Processes. So In terms of processes, because these were areas that were basically run in silos before, the audit did its thing, compliance did its thing, risk did its thing, there was not much awareness of the linkages between workflows and the implicit dependencies on each other. And this actually would have implications for, data ownership as well as accountability, and therefore who needs who to do their job, properly, as it were, and who needs to be informed of what activity takes place. So just creating, clarity around those areas was an important challenge to address. One of the biggest challenges, though, I would say, was a shift from an on-premise IT paradigm to the world of the cloud. So this was our first major enterprise-wide cloud deployment. And for an entity, a company that really, had no previous experience in this, it was a brave step for us to take. We would say that it was something that, I wouldn't say we were dragged kicking and screaming, but there was quite a lot of vacillation before we pulled the trigger on this one. And I would say we have no regrets at this point in time, but it was not an easy decision to make. Okay, so having set the stage, how did we actually get to rolling out? So of course, we had to establish our level of readiness. One of the things I would say about implementing the GRC solutions from MetricStream is, if you're not ready, don't bother. I really think I just can't put it any other way. The solution is sophisticated. It's very, very logical. It's very clinical in the way it approaches the GRC workflows. And if you're not there, it can frustrate you. So we looked at our level of readiness across the different GRC work streams. So we knew we were ready with business continuity. We already had an established BIA process. We had an inventory of critical processes. We had detailed, documented notifications, matrices and call trees. We were ready. We had the elements that could populate the libraries. We had a clear workflow. And so the value from implementing the business continuity module was basically automating what we already did, but also giving some additional capability. So for example, instead of having a sort of qualitative, subjective evaluation of an RTO, of a recovery time objective, we now had a clear scientific process for establishing RTOs. So that was a big value add for the organization. But the point is, we were ready for business continuity. In terms of operational risk, we described our level of readiness as moderate. We had tools, we had operational risk tools that we, in operation. We had an inventory of risks and controls. What we didn't have was a clear setup of workflows to ensure that some of the tools arrived at the right place or the right person. So that took some time, but we got there in the end. Compliance. So of course, just being blunt about where we are, we would have seen our level of readiness as being low for this. And it's because mainly the compliance function really was more set up to identify the areas of compliance and to ask the different areas, different business lines to attest to their level of compliance. But the concept of having compliance test plans was pretty new to the organization. So it's something that they had to build upon. So basically, we would see ourselves as being not that ready to truly exploit all the capabilities of the compliance module in eGRC, but at the same time, there was value gained from adopting the module. Policy and document management. We had established document approval processes in place. We had an existing inventory of documented policies and procedures. So really, this was just a matter of uploading and creating the workflows. There were a couple of tweaks we had to do just to address some of our own nuances, but by and large, we were ready. Similar position in terms of internal audit. Readiness level was pretty decent. We had established reporting formats, established audit procedures, and so it was really simple to go in. Right, so, there has to be a philosophy for deployment when you're dealing with multiple apps, right? Some things have to go first and some things have to go last. So even besides the level of readiness, we quickly realized that the elements that made BCP effective would need to be put in place first before you could build out operational risk and internal audit. So we focused on making sure we had all the library pieces that link to BCP. So the organization is a foundational activity, a foundational object. And what we realize is that even an organization that is relatively small, as we are, sometimes arriving at a common view of who reports to who and who is placed where can be pretty difficult. Sometimes it could be a situation where someone's position has changed, a new subsidiary has been created or renamed, different things like that. So sometimes it's difficult to have the same perspective on the organization across assurance groups. So that was a big part of our foundational activities. Processes. It's very common for organizations to have more processes, documented or identified rather, than really what they really need. And so, when I go later in the presentation, you see why I mentioned 1,000 processes, right? So our job was, do we identify all processes or all critical processes? And we made a judgment call and said, you know what? If we try to identify all processes, we'll be here forever, right? And I want to just quote one of our previous presenters. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. So we felt that critical processes were good enough. GRC is a journey, let's start. So we identified the critical processes, and again, this was processes that we'd have had from our previous work in BCP. It wasn't that hard. Then we identified the assets that supported critical processes. The risks and the controls was work that was already in place from prior to the implementation. But we just needed to communicate it to our fellow assurance groups and ensure a standard hierarchy of risks so that we understood where each risk lay in the organization. So basically, that risk taxonomy was something that had to be agreed to pretty early in the game. And linked to that would have been an inventory of controls relevant to the organization's risks. Again, this was something you already had in place before. So, I can't emphasize the importance of having these foundational libraries in place. I think if you're not there yet, it really makes your implementation challenging. You really have to be there. In terms of dependencies among the different groups, and again, linked to how people view different things. So organization chart. So there was some challenge there because the way how compliance views an org chart and the use of it would have been different from BCP. Compliance is more concerned with legal structure, who is responsible and accountable for sign-off on statutory requirements and making sure they take place. Whereas BCP is more interested in operational accountability and who signs off on recovery strategy and who signs off on the recovery plan and the RTOs. So this did pose a challenge, which we eventually resolved, but it's very important to have, as an assurance group, have a clear sense of what the organization looks like, a single version of the organization. I have heard that you can have multiple versions, but in my experience, I think it's just good to have one vision of the truth and to work with that. So basically, we took us some time to get there, but we got there. The risk and control linkages. If you really want to get value from GRC, you have to have that, same set of perspectives on the risks and the controls, so that when the assurance team or different members of the assurance team approach the business, they are not confusing them, right? So we are assessing the same risk, the same controls, and therefore, when there are control deficiencies or control gaps, we identify the similar kinds of issues, rating them similarly, and therefore really addressing the control environment in a coordinated way. So having that risk and control linkage between operational risk and internal audit was very, very important. So what have been our key deployment challenges 2 years ago? From 2 years ago, as I said before, is our major enterprise software as a service implementation. It's been a learning process for us, right? It's been a learning process. Understand that, when something is not going right, you can't just call IT. You have to manage your relationship with the vendor, and it's your responsibility to understand what they are accountable for and what you are accountable for. So again, this was an iterative process for us, and one with which we had a lot of support from MetricStream. And I can't thank them enough for their cooperative stance during this period. We had used a fast-track implementation approach, and one of the challenges of that was getting, the right number of use cases and a particular level of quality of use cases to really understand how the solution would deliver value for us. So that was a challenge. I think we got it right in most cases, but after deployment, you always see, this is something I could have done better or differently. There were instances of that, but by and large, I would say our use cases were of a high quality. So in terms of our implementation rollout and strategy, when you have diverse user audiences, you can't have one approach. You have to have a multi-pronged approach. Some people like a hand-holding session, they want you to come to them or they come to you, you sit with them, you walk them through the process, you walk them through the application. They like that, they respect that, they value it. Some say, just send me the manual. Just send me the manual, that's what I want. I don't have time. Just send me the manual. Meet them where they are. If that works for them, that works for them. Someone say, okay, let's do a WebEx, or let's do a conference call. Let's share screens and look at it together. And my take on it is, you be as high touch or as low touch as required. The important thing is the right touch for the right audience. We also have to evangelize the value of eGRC. And again, you have to target your message to each group, to each user group. So of course, the assurance staff, those who actually have to drive the assurance work itself, bring them on board, let them understand what's different, what's better. The operations staff, those who typically would have to complete activities like a BIA or a lost event report or resolve an issue. The line managers who would probably have to approve it. And then the senior managers who just really want to know, where's all this taking us? Why are we doing all this? What's the value add? What are my risks? What are my issues? So targeted evangelization is very important so that you really find out what matters most to your audience. Change management was something we also had to work on. I mentioned before issue management and revise processes for that. And basically understand what's an issue and how do you rate issues and where do issues get escalated. I think that was something that we had to refine as we go along, because previous to that, some assurance functions didn't have a concept of issue management, but once they saw how it worked for operational risk and audit, they wanted to incorporate it into their workflow. So this was something that they benefited from. And again, to make GRC work, your quality of information is important. So new information flows had to take place, right? So when their org chart changes, the assurance groups need to be informed so that they can reassign org user roles. They can also change the org structure to ensure that the right people get the right information to make the right decision. Within the project team, we had different lines of communication. So we had upward to the senior management and board via the steering committee and risk committees. We had downward to line management and staff via email advisories. And internally within the project team, we had assurance groups meeting at least twice a month via workshops and just resolving issues we had in common. When it's integrated GRC, it can't be you do your own thing, I do my own thing. You have to meet together, you have to understand the linkages, you have to understand who needs who to get something done. And I think that was very important for us as a team. So, where are we? So, it's one thing to put an app in production. It's another thing to get people to actually use it and get value from it. So, it's been a journey for us. So, sitting here right now, or rather standing here right now, in June of 2019, you know, we can definitely say that the policy and document management system is live, it's being used, we're getting value from it. We can say that about compliance management, we can say that about internal audits. So there's no parallel activity happening, it's all in the GRC apps, right? So full adoption, full user acceptance there. Business continuity management, this is our first full cycle of using the application end to end. So we have completed the business impact analysis part, we've gotten the RTOs, and right now we are actually documenting, or getting the users to document, I should say, the recovery plans that align up with the RTOs and for each business entity. So this process is expected to take us through the end of July, and we are well on target to reach there. In terms of operational risk management, we had to take a more gradual approach because of the sheer, I guess, complexity of the tools. And while it's very tempting to do all at once, I would strongly recommend that given the complexity of some of these tools, you win your audience over one by one. So we have, of course, implemented issue management and loss events and metrics under operational risk management. We recently kicked off our self-assessments, right? And we will actually be using our risk assessment tool in very short order. But the key thing is, don't drown the audience. Don't try to boil the ocean. Let them, you know, get used to the tools. Let them get used to the thinking behind the tools, how it helps them. And so we have had to adjust our expectations in terms of, you know, how fast we implement, how fast we get to user acceptance. But so far, what we can say, what has been delivered has been accepted. And I think that's where you can get your satisfaction, rather than forcing down multiple tools down the business truth. They're not ready, you get resistance, and then you have a situation where there's no user acceptance whatsoever. So we're very comfortable where we are right now, and we think in due time we can start talking about additional deployments or enhancements to what we've already rolled out. All right, so what did we get from all of this? Right, so like I mentioned, there were 5 modules, well 6 if you count issue management. It's used by all the different assurance groups, so it's 6 apps, I would say, yes, 6 apps. So all on the cloud, supporting approximately 2,000 users. So In our organization, we have 1,800 permanent employees and 200 temporary or contract employees. And they all have access to EGRC. They all use the policy and document management tool because all our employees are expected to be familiar with their policies and procedures. So that's a massive undertaking to touch that number of people in one organization. Right? Business impact analyses have been conducted, and this goes across all lines of business in all jurisdictions, right? All critical processes. And we have issue tracking to all relevant employees. So we are seeing that coverage across the enterprise. So GRC is no longer a secret. It's out there, people know about it, they're using it. So right now we have enabled qualitative and quantitative risk assessments, controlled self-assessments, and KRIs. It's supported risk-based audit planning for us, continuous control monitoring for compliance, and I think ultimately reduced remediation time and action planning. So in short, before we had manual duplicated workflows, but now it's automated and efficient. Before we had siloed GRC data, compliance has one set of data, risk has one, audit has one, BCP has one. Now it's a single GRC data repository with clear ownership of each data elements and strong data governance over same. Before, risk was seen as the work of the risk function. Now risk is everyone's business. So we didn't just use the user acceptance program to get people to accept a new software. We used that user acceptance rollout to get them to accept their responsibility, right, as a first line of defense, as it were. Before, when we had more assurance work, that meant more headcount. But given the solution we have now, it's highly scalable, so we don't have to focus on headcount to get assurance work completed. Like I mentioned, this was the first major enterprise-wide cloud deployment. And so before, our risk system was on-premise and required in-house support and really had fallen into disuse. That's the truth. But now we have a high availability, secure software as a service that we are very, very happy to utilize. And basically, we are seeing user adoption, user acceptance of same. So I know in the interest of time, I just focus on one specific module in terms of clear benefits, right? So, like I said, over 1,000 critical processes, and I deliberately put it critical in inverted commas because, one of the things is, you don't want to alienate your audience. So he said, listen, if you as an entity think it's critical, given the criteria we have given you to select, put it down, right? But we certainly expect that this number will probably reduce for the next cycle of BIAs, right? So we have coverage of all the critical processes in the group. We have identified the critical assets, the IT assets in the main, related to those processes. We now have a centralized repository of critical employee contact information. Now, this is important. You would think that this is something you would have from HR, right? But, it's actually, I can say that we are the one place that has this information for all employees, right? We haven't implemented IT GRC solution from MetricStream, but using the BCM module has allowed us to rate the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our information assets in line with ISO 27001. And basically, it has set us up to do IT risk assessments. So it has brought value that we didn't necessarily think we would have gotten up front. Like I said before, sorry about that. We have a now highly robust assessment of our recovery time objectives and a more logical development of our recovery strategies. And of course, there is the ability to access a documented business continuity plan because, you don't necessarily have to be at the office to access it, right? We have single sign-on capability, and therefore, you can remote into the system and get the information, which is very, very useful for when you actually need to access it because you can't access your office, right? So, some of the things have been repeated here, but one of the key points is the BCP workflows are now integrated with information security and operational risk workflows. That is a game changer. And because many times in BCP, it's tempting to see every scenario, every disruption scenario as a crisis. And at the end of the day, risk acceptance is something a business can always practice. So bringing the BCP workflows within that operational risk and enterprise risk framework was very important, as well as linking it to the work of information security. And this deployment has brought that front and center for us, and we're very happy for that. Right, so think about this value add. 1,000 critical processes, we know where they are in terms of their evaluation of the business impact. And, you can see your progress. So as of April 2019, we can say that 66%, that's 2/3 of our entire critical processes have been evaluated. We have RTOs for those, right? And 40% are in progress, meaning, they've done the work, but somebody has to press that button that says approve before it's considered completed. So, that's still a decent level of progress. Yes, there's a 20% that's still out there as of April 2019. That's the last measurement I did before coming to the States for this summit. Maybe it mightn't impress many here, but when I think about how long the BIA process used to take, which was almost a full year, having started this process properly in January this year, and at April basically, practically completed, this is actually a very, very big value add for us. And we know it will get better because this was the first time the processes had to be entered for the first time. You don't have to do this work next cycle, so we know it will get better and better. Right. And this is really where you want to end up, right? You want to know, what are my critical processes? Where do I need to invest my recovery spend, right? And so of the 66% that's been completed, we have been able to, get this analysis from MetricStream and see who really is critical in that grouping. Of course, this number will change or could change when the remaining processes not yet analyzed come through. But the point I'm making is that clear insight into where your criticality needs are. Right, so I've spoken before about how you actually have a successful GRC software deployment. And I think at the end of the day, it's about user acceptance, right? You have the most sophisticated, aesthetically pleasing, robust system, but if no one's using it, it's basically a white elephant. And we definitely don't want a white elephant for this. So, this is the user login report for May 2019. So this was the report I got just before I flew out. As you can see, a fairly consistent trend of high usage. If you think about what GRC is, if you consider we have 2,000 staff members, between 400 and 500 accessing the system on a daily basis. So obviously the troughs are the weekends and the holidays. We get many public holidays in Trinidad and Tobago, something I'm thankful for, right? But if you look at a pattern, you see people are using the system. And that's where you really want to be. And maybe they're using it because they have to finish their BIAs in time. I don't know. But they're using it. Maybe they're using it because they're now starting to enter loss events and so on. But the point is, the user take-up is what you really want to focus on. So, just looking to wrap up now. One of the key learnings from this adventure we've had at MetricStream: get your ducks in a row before you start. Get the ducks in a row. Take account of what makes sense, user readiness for the apps, and come up with a logical flow as to how you implement, right? In hindsight, I would say that we had a logical flow, but perhaps you might need to give them a bit more time for each segment to sink in. But it's important to have a logical flow in mind. Always remember the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Build cross-functional use cases. It's very tempting to think about your own assurance group, your own narrow assurance group, but you have to think cross-functional. You have to work a scenario through that touches each assurance group and how that would impact them. Treat roll-on user acceptance as a marathon, not a sprint. It's very tempting in our corporate life to want everything now or want everything yesterday. But user acceptance is something that's gained gradually. And like I said, it's been, to get to this stage where you have a quarter of the staff population using the application every day compared to maybe less than 1% in the previous solution we had. This is something that you want to be proud of, right? So what are the best practices that helped us get to this pretty good situation? We invested in the MetricStream University training for our project team. It doesn't initially in budget, but once it was presented to us by MetricStream and we looked at it and what value it could add, we went to the steering committee and said, we need this, it will help. And in their wisdom, they agreed. And I would say it's really accelerated user acceptance, right? In terms of best practice, again, I would say adopt out of the box. It will never be perfect because, we always have this attachment to the past or to the tradition, and therefore if it looks different from what we are used to or as this process, is a natural inclination to push back. But I genuinely believe the out of the box is aligned to best practice. So, it's very difficult to see why there'll be any case for significant customization. And I think we have heard many of the presenters earlier on yesterday and today speak about, having a level of configurability is good, but not customization. It's not really that useful to you. So in wrapping up the road ahead, we want to embed eGRC into everyday operational activities. Because let's face it, for most employees, risk isn't top of mind. It's something that, might come across their radar every now and then, but we want to make it top of mind. So one of the key things that we are putting in place is email notifications to all relevant staff so that it becomes part of their daily, routine to address GRC matters, right? So this is the way they put up their core banking solution to enter a loan or a deposit or what have you. They'll go into eGRC and respond to their tasks or their notifications and see it as part of their role. We're also looking at, getting more value, more business value from eGRC through reporting. That's something that is a work in progress, but basically that's the next stage for us. So really that's all I really wanted to focus on today and leave time for some questions. This light is very blinding. So, if you want to ask, raise your hands, and I think there are a couple of runners around who will locate you. But, yeah.
How do you bring everybody to the same page when everybody says that I test my controls differently? How do you create a library? And I'm talking about a bigger organization where there are probably like 20, 25 risk management units. Okay.
Okay. All right. So you have to, I mean, it's something one of the previous presenters said, and I'm gonna quote him: committee, committee, committee. We all hate it, but you have to do it. And I mean, committee sounds formal, but really it's it's creating a group, a working group of like-minded individuals who see the bigger picture, who understands that assurance is not an end in itself. It's a tool to help the organization. And once you get sort of like-minded personalities around the table, that gives you the opportunity to really agree on what are the standards for any element of your GRC, whether it's a library object, so whether it's how do we define an asset, how do we define a process, who's responsible for controlling the inventory of assets, who's responsible for controlling the inventory of controls or risks, what workflows make sense, what workflows actually get us to the desired outcome. And that's kind of where you need to start, get the like minds together. And sometimes you have to work with people, and sometimes you have to work around people. That's just the reality. But that's really where you need to be at, getting like minds together, getting positions agreed, getting them approved. So notice I mentioned the steering committee. So the steering committee, our steering committee had a CRO, the CIO, the CFO, the head of HR, the head of audit, internal audit, chief compliance officer. So the people who really are ultimately accountable and who are able to see the bigger picture. So that's what you need to do, in my humble opinion. I think we have roughly 55 more seconds.
So when you were identifying your critical processes and then identifying your risks, did you encounter any shared risks across the organization, and how did you, I guess, put those risks into the tool, and how did you approach that?
Okay, right. So let me deal with the critical processes first. So I think I did mention before that we had that previous experience of identifying critical processes. And because our BIA process before was very thorough, enterprise-wide, standardized templates, there was a universal understanding of what the critical processes were, and so that didn't pose a challenge. In terms of the risk, though, very early on, we took the position that the operational risk group would be responsible for creating the risk hierarchy. So what we would have done is created a very broad hierarchy based on standard best practice definitions, but enough sort of flexibility to add additional risks subsequently. So for example, we would have had all the Basel loss event categories. I'm not sure if you're aware, the internal fraud, external fraud, right, that kind of thing. But we made sure and gave them very, very specific examples of those risks in the level 3 and level 4 of the hierarchies, but then left enough room so that if somebody wants to enter a very specific individual risk, it's there. So it's not necessarily about trying to, I would say, identify all of the risks up front. I think that's pretty challenging because you can have different contexts for risk. Somebody can have a project that's happening, and therefore there's risk inside that project. But then, you don't want to get stuck. So I would say to you, build a comprehensive risk hierarchy, cover the different categories of risk, drill down as far as you can, but still leave space to add additional risk as you grow as an organization and as you mature your program, so that you leave room for that sort of flexibility. So that's really how I would take that situation.
Looking at your implementation and timeline and the modules that you have implemented, right? So there are certain service packs and feature releases provided by MetricStream. How did you handle those, and what is your experience when you added those service packs or feature releases?
Right, so I mean, we're currently in version 6, and our position was, let's get our current version done right, get the user accepted. So we have really not focused on that. I think we are definitely open to, getting more enhancements going forward. But I think because of how much work user acceptance is, we don't want to sort of disrupt that flow. So certainly we are in a stage where we want to settle down to business as usual for our existing apps before we start doing anything more, I guess, creative or the next level of enhancements. But basically, we're at a stage where we're getting our users used to the system. And so far, it's been positive. It took a while, but it's been positive. So we don't want to just kind of disrupt that flow. So that's where we are right now. But MetricStream has been a very patient and supportive partner. And they haven't tried to sell us product. That's not their approach. They've helped us as a partner in getting solutions. So that basically is where we are at right now. Okay, I think we're definitely out of time. I don't know if there's a next presenter on, but I want to thank you for your participation and hope you enjoy the rest of the GRC Summit. Oh, sorry. Oh, mine. This blinding light. Sorry, go ahead. Okay, no problem. Thank you. Okay.